So she's really on a roll. She's one of these players who she's come through later in her tennis career to have a really excellent one now. To reach back-to-back Grand Slam finals is really quite something. And she said, as you just mentioned, that was a really difficult match for her against Donna Vekic, a Croatian player, the longest running semi-final in this tournament's history, 2 hours and 51 minutes. And they really were going at it. She was crying a lot because she was so exhausted at the end of that match.
Yeah, I think I read a quote by Courtney saying that she felt either one of them could have won it, and she felt for Vekic because they just put it all out there. Should we talk about the other semi-final, Barbara Krejcikova, who's the winner? How did that compare?
Yeah, it was interesting because actually it felt quite flat at the beginning because there was so much emotion invested in the first semi-final. But it took a while for the second one to get going. How to make it work because they are less financial there. That's not quite so much record. 2022 World Champion Jane Rebecca was favourite to win this title. She's very calm on the court. She's talked about not wanting to put her personality out there too much. So she was up in the first set against Barbara Krejcikova, who is the French Open champion herself in the singles and has won 10 Grand Slam doubles titles. And it's, again, somebody who has had double success and has come through in the singles age of her career, who seems to be, again, having that calmness, and she is doing incredibly well. And it was Krejcikova who came through that semi-final in 3 sets, really had to turn the match around. And as you mentioned, she was that young November who was her mentor, her coach. She was quite important as we talked about the match as well, to have a long conversation with her tomorrow. And she talked so much about the rules and said that these players meant so much to her. And it's interesting to see different players from around the world what was it means to be such a special place.
Absolutely. Tell us a bit more about the one.
Jana Novotná was a Czech player, and if you were old enough, you might remember that she lost a final here. I think that was 1997, and she cried on the shoulder of a royal family member who was here. He's now. But she was. It was just an emotional moment. She collapsed really onto his shoulder, and it was just quite a special moment. And then she came back to win the title, and that was what was so exceptional, that she had that resilience in 1988 that really meant that every year, in front of other people, then rotated to the first couple of years, something like Andy Murray, who was the title in 2012, and came back to win in 2013. So she,
Yes, there we go.
she was going, no, okay, so we want to it was the Duchess of Kent, and everybody knows she stood out on the level of the title, and she then coached. Would you have some of the days that process that? She did so she had to very much about it. So it was a huge shock for her, which was really defeated by 2017. That's why we mentioned the rules. She was just
Now, this is going to be the first time we've obviously these opportunities open up because some of the more dominant players of the sport
She might
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Lots of things in touch with things about the one thing. January this year, I decided to I'm a stranger once a year. Some days I don't see anyone as I'm so warm. When I do see people, I find a stranger's shock reaction of delight to be flattered is so pleasant. That's what Sharon will find that if you smile at a stranger, in London as well, they're shocked and happy as well. I walk down the stairs backwards all the time because honestly, this is quite good. Getting around I've just exchanging gratitudes with my hospital and doing 3 a day each morning. One for oxytocin, something very well, one for serotonin, something I'm good at, and one for dopamine, something I'm curious about, might be generic use of elements. 8 for let's keep going. The one thing that we've changed that has had an impact on my life is I'm inspired by Dr. Anthony Stapleton, one of the world's values. Now, in September last year, Selma Taylor and Daniel Thomas Davina Wigan were on the tube together when they say they were victims of narcissistic attack. The assailant in question, Woman, is reported to have accepted a caution of racially aggravated assault after being arrested. A few months later, Selma, Danny, and Davina were told that they were being charged by the Crown Prosecution Service for assault. The trial was supposed to start on Wednesday this week at the Magistrates Court, but just beforehand, the CPS discontinued the charges, saying the trial was unlikely to lead to conviction. Selma, who is the CEO of Sample Black Sisters, a international organisation, joins me now in the room. Welcome to me, Selma, both of you. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us today. We'll start with you, Selma. Can you take us through what happened to the night in September last year?
Thank you for having us, Mr. Howard. In September last year, when I was sexually abused, 3 black men in our fortune centrifuge went out for a couple of hours and I went home and took them with their life. Went to New York, where victims of a disgusting, verbal racist abuse, which they called some really offensive names. We were called slaves, we were told that we were told that we arrested her, and we were subjected to monkey jobs. When we challenged that, this then quickly escalated into a nasty violent attack where locks of hair were pulled out of my life and myself, and I sustained 2 bites to my left arm, which necessitated a tetanus and hepatitis shot as well as antibiotics. But the most shocking thing of all was that there was excellence to our safety. There was not a police officer who did absolutely nothing at all to de-escalate the situation or protect us from any kind of threat. It stepped violently when it became violent, but he did nothing. And then when we complained about that, we were met with civil charges. So as well as the police that we were charged with, Dan and I and we also complained and then charged with offences for non-behaviour at court. We had to do a statement from the Community Police. They sent us this saying on 29th of September 2023, an off-duty Met officer was present and intervened during an altercation that began on a tube train. This altercation continued inside an underground station until the arrival of British Transport Police. The incident was investigated by them and not the Met. A complaint was made to the Met Directorate of Professional Standards in relation to the off-duty officer. This was referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct for a reviewing case. Daniel, what were your first thoughts on the different scared, angry, and just live it every day, but you're such a high state when it physically happens to you. You're never surprised by racism, but then when someone says something racist to you, you take it back and just causes to be on alert. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling? I'm still shocked. I'm still upset. I'm very angry. But I understand and recognize that we need to speak about this. We need to raise awareness about this because this is the lived experience of every black person in this country. Every day when we step out, we put a face on, right? We deal with microaggressions and sometimes open racism, and we have the opportunity to choose if we want to engage with it or not. But when that racism becomes, violent, when somebody is invading your personal space, you no longer have that choice. A physical attack, for me, this is the first time, it's not the first time I've experienced racism, but it's the first time I've been physically attacked because of the one thing I can't do anything about, which is the color of my skin.
How did it affect you when you announced that these servants had been anti-abortion and who you knew who charged this?
Originally, I thought it was hilarious that it was getting pulled in for an interview. And people they tell me how many people sort of say, this is what we're in charge of. But I didn't think the sentence was very authorizing. And when I realized that they were was just taken aback by that because I really didn't think it was going that far. And so whenever we are in that situation where we were the victims of a racial, mental abuse and physical assault, and now we are the aggressors, and language that's been used to describe us, loud, aggressive, intimidating. Those are the tropes that, as black women, we can navigate on a daily basis. So not only have we been physically and verbally abused, we've been abused by the system that we're supposed to have faith in. And the system that we pay for. We pay our taxes, we pay the salaries of these police officers, those that work within the criminal justice system. But we're not seen as deserving victims, which is, we know this happens every day through the work that we do. The core bulk of the work that Southfield Black Sisters does, which is advocating for the rights of black minorities and migrant women, some of whom are the most vulnerable in our society. Namely migrant women that have no recourse to public funds, who are victims of domestic violence and other forms of male violence or gender-based violence. And the core work that we do is advocating, being their voice for them, challenging those very same institutions, right, that are there to serve and protect.
I'm going to read out the statement from the British Transport Police, and this is what they said. There is no place for violence or hate speech on the rail network. Detectives carried out a thorough investigation of this incident to establish the full circumstances. This includes extensive reviews of CCTV, body-worn videos, and witness testimonies to provide independent accounts of the incident. The file is then sent to CPS to make decisions on whether it meets the threshold of a charge. And I'll read out the Crown Prosecution Service what they said. We have a duty to keep all cases under continuous review, and following information received in the past few days, we decided that there was no longer a realistic prospect of conviction and these charges were discontinued. Selma, we were supposed to be in court today.
We're supposed to be exactly today's
So how are you preparing for that?
How do you prepare for something like that? I know I haven't slept in months. I know the night before Thursday of the trial, I was awake at 5 o'clock in the morning when I was supposed to be getting up a couple of hours later to make my way down. How do you prepare for, again, on a daily basis, we encourage?
What's your job?
Exactly.
You the CEO of Sancom Sisters, one of the most established women's groups in this country, who advocate, as you said, for women of colour for decades. And here you are.
We provide, advocacy and support services and we raise awareness.
But when it happens to you,
But when it happens to us, it's no longer anecdotal. I can now speak of my own personal experiences, but it's not like we didn't know this doesn't happen. Is the point I'm trying to make. But what do you do? What do you do other than continue to challenge? And it's because we challenge, because I first challenged our attacker and then tried to hold the off-duty my police officer accountable, by challenging him why he didn't do anything. This has now been turned around on us, and we are now the aggressors for 10 months, by the way. This has been hanging over us.
what kind of support do you get from the MC clients?
A mixture. Obviously, everyone is very supportive, but then this is for our immediate family and friends, and from those within the black community. This is what they know happens. So, some will be deflated and do not want to engage, and the responses you get will be what to expect. This happens, we are nothing. We are not valuable. There is a two-tailed system.
But to be writing to down, tell us the sector that you work in.
And support massive legacy, historical sections.
So you know a bit about the system, and so you have a bit of agency.
What if I didn't? When you think of the fact that, when you think of the homeless thing, when you think of the crime problem, the woman that has nothing else to do with where English is their second language, they are not fully aware of their rights. And usually when they do report, and what they hear when we do go and report, what the police focuses on is, for example, their immigration status, rather than the crime that's taking place.
We talked about women's general faith communities. We know that trust in police is very low, particularly among and even Muslim women of colour. So in your statement to court on Wednesday, you said this experience had reaffirmed your lack of faith in the police. What do you need to do to restore that faith?
Well, on a personal level and related to our case, I would say that first and foremost, what I'm doing, we're overapology for the discriminatory treatment that we received at the hands of the Met Police, the British Transport Police, and the criminal justice system. And we are exploring what the remedies are important in certificates with our community. One of the concerns are these months, depending on the outcome of the case, that's going to affect our careers. And the sector isn't something that you go into lightly. It's because you are passionate about advocacy. And I met someone who put it forward as a manager, and because of her, I'm in this sector and I'm very passionate about this sector. And to study, to be in it, to be in ESMA, and for it to just be taken away by someone's disregard of our experiences, that impacts on physically, mentally.
What would your message be to other girls through the sort of worries and whichever this platform that you do?
I think I would start off by urging the Met Police to, first of all, accept the findings of the most recent case by Daily Disease, which also highlights the institutional racism, misogyny, areas such as which was also highlighted 30 years ago in the first season. That will show a willingness to the black communities, as well as the community to us, that they are listening, that they are trying to learn, and that they're actually implementing
talking to you that this is very raw and hard to talk about. So how do you find it? What's it done to you?
When you are supporting a service user, then you're trying to convince them to have faith in the system, the same system that is troubleshooting. And that's quite, it's difficult to navigate. Having support from friends and family, but also your network is very important to kind of understand that and but I think it's important that we continue to recruit. Because by doing so, we raise awareness where there are failures. And if a victim of crime, a black woman, a young black woman, feels she's not getting the responses that she deserves, because they have a duty of care to protect us, then that's when hopefully she can be directed to the services that we have. And I really thank you for saying that and actually continue this very important to
Just a very quick, where do you find it's going to take care of it?
we've got no choice. We take it day by day, and recognise when there's a struggle with strong black people, which can be quite dangerous at times because being strong to
Exhausted?
Well, I'm not saying. I'm just trying to survive every day. I'm just trying to navigate the racist system that we've got. It's absolutely wretched. We just have to keep going. I know it's like anger that's driving me. So we'll raise it. Says they're trying just before the end. We had the conversation dropped. I know it was a good thing. I know we no longer have this hanging over us, but I can't, live with the fact that I'm supposed to be grateful for. What am I supposed to be grateful for? I was a victim of a violent attack, and then you charged me. So now I've got no justice. We have no justice, and we have to move on. We need justice, and we need people to hold accountable.
Sue says, what does it say? Looked at all his radio and TV shows. My husband and I have stuck to the 5-2 diet ever since Michael introduced it many years ago. Lost weight initially, not put on a pound since. So grateful to him. And Julian says, Michael knows this philosophy. Lucky to see it I can be control of my life. I can choose how I live by changing small things. Changes don't have to be massive to make a difference. Thank you. Keep coming in. Now, very excited to talk to this next guest. The Australian vocalist, pianist and trumpeter Audrey Powell was drawn to jazz from a young age. Her style ranges from hook-laden synth pop songs to on-form cinematic soundscapes, R&B ballads, and jazz improvisations. She's recently released her debut album, From the Fire. Delighted to say she joins me now in the studio. Lovely album.
Thank you so much for listening.
Oh no, absolutely. Congratulations. Tell us about it. How would you describe the sound of From the Fire?
Oh, that's quite a hard question.
I know it's quite
I think it's quite cinematic, and it's all jazz influenced and jazz inspired, but there's also some pop songs and lots of trumpet solos. Yeah, but it's I try to be as authentic as possible about who I am.
how beautiful to be liberated to just create something that you want to. It doesn't have to fit into a genre, but you are inspired by jazz.
I'm educated in jazz as well, but most of what I love is somehow from jazz, basically.
So what drew you to jazz?
Well, I think because I started playing the trumpet, but when I was young, I always loved, like, my mum used to watch a lot of NGM musicals, and there's sort of the Great American Songbook. And then I watched this film, High Society, with Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and Louis Armstrong, and then when there was an option at my rural primary school to learn instrument, I said the trumpet, and I was like, oh, I know what that is, I'll go with that one. And then once I started playing the trumpet, that I loved it. not that long, like an hour and a half. Yeah, and I only lived there for 5 years in Melbourne, so I'm a city girl.
How difficult is it to play? Is it
It's very difficult actually. Like it's because there's only 3 octave spells. You change the pitch of the notes by changing the speed of the air. So you have to have a really good ear to be able to hear what you're going for. But it's dealing with a lot of really small muscles, primarily in all of the muscles that you can see, diaphragm, lungs. Yeah, it's really the air doing work, and then your lips react to the air. So complicated.
magic? How do you control the breathing?
I do a lot of I do long notes every day. It's a very physical instrument. You have to practice every day. You can't really take too much time off.
Do you think you'd be a natural like diver?
Well, I think
Have you tried that?
I haven't tried it, but I don't love swimming. But I do love it. I just don't like it when it's like exercise based. But I think I know I have a big love for wrestling. I've done tests and I know it's extraordinarily strong for someone my size.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I think we should hear you in action. I'm going to come to you first. Your letter is all about giving women and girls a path. Why did you choose to write about this particular topic?
Thank you for having me. So basically, my letter was just to, basically amplify my voice and the voices of my fellow activists and sisters around the world. I just find it very disheartening when we are expressing ourselves as girls and often very left unheard. So I knew for sure that a lot of girls, a lot of activists, a lot of advocates who write letters who want to go to the government officials, maybe community leaders, and it's just really, really hard and disheartening, like I said, that oftentimes when we take our time to express our feelings, to express our visions, this is like literally our dreams. Most of the times call of action, our hopes, and we just want to have an ear.
And you're very young. You're only 21, aren't you? No.
Yes.
And you started as an activist at 16. I need to say this because you're very impressive. So we need to share that with the world, how young you are and how long you've been doing it. And what are some of the main issues facing women and girls in Malawi that you actually call out?
Definitely, I would not totally support the gender inequalities that happen all over the world and in Malawi. Yes. Being a girl in Malawi is really tough. Sometimes, as an activist, I have also gone through that a lot. And also, when I'm working with my fellow young girls and leaders in my community, we definitely just want to be given the platform to express ourselves. I mean, we have all the recommendations, we have the ideas for change to the problems that we face. So I
Period
really
poverty.
stress this. Yeah, for sure. Period poverty, and we have issues where there's so many inequalities, and that will our life, long life, it's affecting a lot of things, including the education, economic, social growth, a lot. Even health-wise as well. I am a social reproductive of the right activist activation, so it affects a lot. So it's just me calling out on my letter, just me calling out on everyone to just hear, because we definitely want you to just hear.
We are going to hear you. I'm going to get you to read the letter in just a moment. Before we do, I'm going to bring in equally as impressive Olivia. Olivia in Spain. Tell us your age, because I think we need to know how young and brave you are. But also why it was important for you to address your letter to the department.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm 17. And I wrote this letter. This is the second letter. It's a series of letters that I wrote a couple of years ago. And it was during the pandemic when I saw nature coming back, because we were all locked in our homes, and we could see the power of Mother Nature, right? How it grew back in the cities. And at the same time, I also created a series of activist art that are based on words and letters that reflect the power of our planet and everything that inhabits it.
Shall we hear your letter? Will you read it to us, Olivia? Olivia, can you hear me? Yeah, let's hear your letter. Let's go for it.
Dear Earth, I promise I will take better care of you. Stay strong and please don't leave us, because without you, we can't survive. Your letters are what keeps us alive. Without them, we will be extinct. E energetic, A amazing, R respectful, T trusty, and H happy. Please forgive us for all our mistakes. Please give us one more chance. Promise to do better, to be better hosts, because without you, we'll never have lived. I know that you don't belong to us. We and all living things belong to you. This is why I'm trying to do my best. I will do anything to save and heal you. But if everybody puts in a little effort, it would add up to a big difference. This is why I'm writing you this second letter, so that people understand how important you are for us, and how important it is to listen to you and know why and what is going on, to correct our huge mistakes. Dear Earth, I hear your call, and I'm ready to act now. Forgive us.
Brilliant, Olivia. Well done, well done. And Minona, let's hear yours. Your letter.
My letter goes, dear world leaders, I hope my letter and together with the letters of voices of all adolescent girls and young women across the globe will matter. I'm writing this letter as a young girl, a little long, a landlocked country in the southern Africa, Malawi, where many girls' voices are often unheard. So often, as girls and young women, we suffer silently as times and times again. We speak and we're never heard. As girls, we are not requesting much. We just want to be counted. We just want better opportunities with the leadership of girls and women that are often unrepresented in the works of all UN systems and working with you, even in our community. We want to be in the rooms with you, institutionalizing and integrating initiatives and policies, recommendations that affect us while centering our voices. As girls in our diversity, we have the ideal solution to the problems that we face. We just want the bigger platform to share and to also recognize and organize the change that we want. We want our voices to be taken seriously. There is no real change without us in the process. We want a chance to build our futures with the recommendations that we recognize. Yours sincerely. Thank you.
Olivia and Minona, keep up the good work, keep going. It's been such a delight to talk to you and to hear you read your poems out. Thank you so much for speaking to us from Spain and Malawi. Now, today the BBC is holding a Just One Thing Day to pay homage to Dr. Michael Mosley, who died this summer. Dr. Mosley changed so many lives through his cheerful and experimental approach and changed the way we think about health, nutrition and fitness. So we want to hear from you. How's Michael Mosley's work influenced? Has he influenced your approach to health and wellness? Do you have a favourite piece of advice from him that's made a significant impact on your life? Lots of you have been getting in touch. Russ says our 6-year-old son Ted has always listened with such interest to Michael Mosley. He loves combining the one things, and it is a delight when he suggests we go walking backwards in the rain whilst eating turmeric slowly to go and do the gardening, doing random acts of kindness on his Radio 4 podcast, Just One Thing, introduce people to one thing each episode that could change your life, whether that's eating some flaxseed, munching on some beetroot, or going for a swim. One of those things was exercise snacking, basically exercising in short bursts. Here is Dr. Michael Mosley talking about it right here on Wednesday in 2012.
I guess there is a sort of evolutionary argument that in the good old days, way back on the savannah, that's kind of how we did it. We lolled around a bit, walked quite a lot, and occasionally had to make a dramatic burst for it when the saber-toothed tiger, sorry, I've got that. But when danger threatened, you had to really make a burst for it. And in a way, our lifestyle is very different. And certainly way back then, there were no gyms, there was no working out, there was no stuff like that. So it's kind of a sense going back to our roots.
Well, I'm joined now by Marie Murphy, Director of the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre at the University of Edinburgh and Professor of Exercise and Health at Ulster University. She also advises on the UK Physical Activity Guidelines, and Marie worked with Michael a lot over the years, appearing on the podcast and the TV series Trust Me, I'm a Doctor. Now, Marie, you won't mind if I do squats through this interview,
That would be absolutely perfect.
so you worked with Michael a lot over the years. What stood out to you about him? What did you notice Michael was really good at?
Yeah, I did an episode of Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, and started a podcast with meeting him back in about 2018. And I suppose for me as an academic and a researcher, what I liked about him is he was able to take sometimes complex science and complex research and translate it in a really easy to understand manner, but without being condescending, without losing the science and losing the facts. And then on a personal note, he made me, somebody who wouldn't be used to being in the media, he made you relax. He made it easy for you to talk, and he sort of brought what he needed you to say out of you without necessarily putting you on edge.
Yeah, I think on one show many years ago, and we were both reporters on it, and he just real generosity of spirit, very humble, very kind, very not kind of TV personality, but nailed it. Sat down on that sofa, he just had that felt like your own personal doctor when he spoke, didn't he?
Exactly, and he really, his knowledge was encyclopedic, but he was more keen to draw out your knowledge. So I think he didn't. Some people, sometimes you see people and they want to tell you their understanding of stuff. He was very much the opposite. He might pepper the conversation with things he learned along the way, but he was really keen to hear your perspective.
So what actually is exercise snacking?
Well, I like the concept, and he particularly likes the term. I don't really like the term, but what it essentially, the reason, let me tell you why I don't like the term. The term snacking is often associated with food and with very often some unhealthy habits of taking processed food over the course of the day. And so in the exercise world, the physical activity world, we often see that exercise or physical activity is pitted against food. In other words, we say, oh, if you eat this, you have to do exercise to work it off. And so I don't like that association, because to me they're two separate things. Food is one thing, and we can eat healthily, but physical activity has so many more benefits, way, way, way apart from burning calories. There's so many health benefits from being active. So, but once we move past that, the concept I really like, it's this notion that over the course of our normal day, we could do little short bouts of exercise or short bouts of physical activity, which add up over the course of the day. So into something that will help our health and to improve our health, and maybe give us the same amount of activity as we would have got if we did it in a more traditional way, by taking an hour out and going for a run or heading to the gym. So it's this accumulation of short little bouts over the course of the day, opportunistic, picking every opportunity you can to move a little bit more.
Yeah, it works for me. I am an exercise snacker. I'm sorry using the phrase, but it's Michael's phrase, so we're using it today. Because everybody's busy, or we say we're busy, so taking an hour out of the day. But we can all listen to Woman's Hour and maybe basically do squats, which I would like to tell you I'm doing right now. I'm not. I'm sitting very comfortably on my chair. Or do some arm dips, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly, and I think that's the thing. When you ask people why they don't exercise, very often, time is the number one barrier. Now, as you rightly say, I don't know if it's time or if it's just what we say. We say we don't have time, and yet many of us spend many hours on the phone, hours watching our screen. So of course we do have time. It's how we choose to use it. But this is a way of kind of a compromise of saying, okay, you don't have time, but this is something you can do while you're doing something else, or it's something you can do in the very short breaks between doing something else, at the end of a meeting, during a meeting, in between meetings. Most of us spend our lives this day looking at a screen at meetings. So there are loads of little opportunities during those meetings and in between those where you can do something.
I cannot wait for my next meeting where I suggest we do 10 press-ups in the middle of it. Michael was quite an active exercise snacker, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Now, he had a real aversion to running, but he did it because he knew it made him healthy. But he did love this notion of doing things like squats, press-ups, and other activities over the course of the day. And he loved walking, and that's, I suppose, what I find so tragic about his death is that he was doing something that he really did love. He loved walking. He was a massive advocate, and that's where he and I think, connected, because most of my research over the years has been about walking. It's probably the answer to the public health issue of inactivity, because the majority of us can walk, and it's something that we can fit into our everyday lives, and it's probably one of the best forms of exercise.
Okay, you said something huge there, and everyone, we can, some of us can manage a walk. So what's the science behind it?
Yeah, I mean, walking for most of us is moderate intensity physical activity, and the physical activity guidelines from the World Health Organization and all over the world tells us we should accumulate 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise over the course of a week. So that sounds like a lot, but when you break that down into short walks, you could quite easily add that up over the week. So it's really about sort of consciously using the opportunities that present themselves to walk. So can you walk as part of your transport to work? Can you take a walk on your break, or walk at lunchtime, walk a bit further to get your sandwich, hop off the bus a bit earlier, take the dog for a walk? Walking is kind of a universal activity that we can do and add up. And I know now we all many steps, and 10,000 steps a day. And that, to me, that's less important than the fact that as every time you have an opportunity to walk.
Yeah. Marie, lots of lovely listeners have been getting in touch to share what they are doing, how they've incorporated Michael's advice into their life. So if it's okay, let's read some of these out. Eileen says, Michael has helped me in many ways, one in particular in his just one thing, when he says, try wall squats. I'm 71 and struggled to get off my low sofa. Now with stronger leg muscles, I can spring up like a sprightly rabbit. Thank you, Michael, we miss you. Graham says, I think of him and hugely miss the national treasure, Michael Mosley, every day when I do 30 press-ups and 30 squats first thing in the morning, just like he did and recommended. A much better alternative to caffeine to get the day off to a good start. Someone else says here, I'm still drinking multiple green teas a day thanks to Michael Mosley. My lovely mum and Zara and I regularly swap just one things we can try. We were both very saddened by the loss of such a wonderful educator. Michael Mosley's philosophy helped me to see, says Gillian, that I can be in control of my life. I can choose how I live by changing small things. Changes don't have to be massive to make a difference. Marie, thank you so much for joining me to speak to me this morning. That was Marie Murphy, who's Director of Physical Activity for Health Research Centre at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm going to read out a couple more before the end of the programme because we've just been inundated. One thing I changed that has had a profound effect on me is being kind to myself. Using self-compassion quieten down the constant critical voice inside me. That's a very good bit of advice. And a last one from here from Sean about Audrey, who said, mesmerising, soulful, is shown to say the first female jazz trumpeter I've added to my playlist, but Audrey's gone right to the top. Thank you for listening. Join me tomorrow for Weekend Woman's Hour. Anita Rani. Now, swapping out sugar, changing our meal times and chewing more slowly are just some of the ways Dr. Michael Mosley sought to positively influence our eating habits. And after the news in the food programme, we'll hear more about how Michael was able to trial those ideas on willing members of the public to convince them that change can begin with individuals. For one Radio 4 announcer, it seems he didn't need his arm twisting that much at all.
Hello, my name is PG Ellis. I'm an announcer for Radio 4. And the one thing that Michael Mosley confirmed for me was just how good dark chocolate is. They are hot. Therefore, for my obsession with dark chocolate.
And if you'd like an extended treat, chocolatey or otherwise, you can hear more about how Michael has had an impact on all our lives, as we've got a 5 minutes on Michael Mosley podcast for you from the Radio 4 announcers. It's available now on BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 11 o'clock. President Biden has insisted he remains mentally sharp enough to run for re-election, despite mistakenly introducing Ukraine's leader as President Putin at a NATO summit in Washington last night. Later, at a closely watched news conference, Mr. Biden mistakenly referred to his deputy, Kamala Harris, as Vice President Trump. But our North America editor, Sarah Smith, says that for the most part, Mr. Biden had performed well.
I was there in the room and I could see that for nearly 60 minutes he was actually very good. He was very confident when he was talking about foreign policy, economic policy, some of his favourite topics. But of course, not everybody's going to watch an hour of it, so every gaffe matters, and I think that's kind of illustrative of the problem he's got going forward.
The aunt of a woman murdered by a man 9 days after his release from prison has expressed concerns that government plans to release some offenders early could result in them not being properly supervised. Zara Alina was attacked by Jordan McSweeney, who was in the process of being recalled to prison for failing to meet probation officers. The French Coast Guard says 4 migrants have died after a boat they were travelling on with dozens of others capsized in the Channel. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, says she's accelerating action to pursue and bring down dangerous smuggler gangs. Paris says the water quality of the River Seine has improved and is clean enough to bathe in. Recent heavy rainfall and rising pollution levels have led to concerns the river might be too contaminated to host triathlon and marathon swimming events during the Olympics, which start in 2 weeks' time. Pubs and supermarkets are preparing for one of their biggest weekends of the year as football fans celebrate England making it through to the Euro 2024 final. Landlords are expecting to pour an extra 10 million pints from the pre-match build-up to the final whistle. Meanwhile, Tesco says football mania seems to have taken its toll, with a surge in demand for sports bandages, pain relief gels, rubs and ointments. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. And as part of our day to celebrate Dr. Michael Mosley, we have just one thing with the food programme. Here's Sheila Dillon.
As a broadcaster, I always wanted to understand Michael Mosley's talent, his warmth and seriousness, his ability to be light, yet make you want to change your life. The way he avoided the pitfalls of the cheeky, chappy persona. How did he do it? It's very sad to think now what his campaigns, which never felt like campaigns, might have gone on to achieve. More of his beguiling efforts to change us, to bring into our lives those things ignored by our drug and technology-centered medical system. Whatever he challenged us to try, it always seemed fun and doable, and always backed with the research to show that what he'd come up with wasn't just an old tale, but one more thing to help us live better.
Right, it's 7 in the evening and I'm sitting down with my family to eat our evening meal. It is a bit earlier than we usually eat, and I won't be eating again until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Whoa! Anyone want to join me?
I'm 4 days into the challenge now. It has been a bit difficult, I'm not going to lie.
I think I'm so used to eating quickly over the last 10 to 20 years. I have had to kind of mentally check myself and just let myself slow down. So it's all going well. I'm hoping the second half will continue to be positive.
What I want you to do is to add 1 teaspoon a day to your cooking. Could be breakfast, lunch or supper, however you want to do it. But 1 teaspoon a day. Do you think you can manage that?
That sounds okay, yeah, I'm definitely up for giving it a go.
And plus that, I'm adding a nice teaspoon of turmeric and then giving it a good old stir. And it's certainly a wonderfully orange colour. And the advantage of using milk is that that means that I'm going to absorb more of the good stuff as well. And it's also delicious.
Michael Mosley, the warmth and liveliness of his voice getting you ready to take attention. This episode is a celebration of his work and a look at how that ties in with what we've been working on at the food programme for some decades, that food matters. So, in Michael's listicle style, here are 5 reasons why he mattered in getting us all to understand why eating better leads to living better. Let's refresh our pleasure and yours in grasping how vital his voice was, how those just one things were connected to much bigger things, the way he was able to show us through examining the evidence for that thing and the trial of it on some willing member of the public, that system change can begin, maybe has to begin, with individuals. And to do all that, I'm joined in the studio by producer Natalie Donovan. And Natalie, you've spent the last week or so listening to the Just One Thing archive and have come up with a list of the ways. Where do you want to start?
My first thought on this is that Michael understood that food and the way we eat can be as powerful as man-made medicine. And this understanding kind of underpins all of the episodes he made about food, segments of which we're going to play again today.
Michael trained as a doctor, married a doctor, and at least one of his children has followed in their footsteps. But he understood early on that medical treatment doesn't have much to do with health. Modern medicine is about what happens when things go wrong. But what interested him was what creates health, what we can do ourselves to keep out of the doctor's surgery. It's radical because, as we've shown on this program often enough, although the majority of people who are sick in this country are sick because of bad diets and lack of exercise, medical training just doesn't prepare doctors for that fact.
And we'll hear more about that soon, but let's remind ourselves of Dr. Michael's story, which he shared again recently on an episode of Just One Thing, all about swapping out sugary snacks.
10 years ago, I discovered to my shock that I had type 2 diabetes, but I managed to get my blood sugars under control by losing 9 kilos. Since then, I have improved my diet, cutting out junk food and doing a lot more cooking from scratch. But like most people, I still get these occasional mad, crazy cravings for sugary food. One way to try and satisfy your sugar cravings is to eat more fruit. Now, I've heard claims that fruit contains sugar and so is no better for you than biscuit or cake. But although fruit does contain sugar, it is bound up with fiber, and that makes a big difference to how quickly sugar is absorbed and processed. And as we'll see, eating more fiber may even reduce sugary cravings.
That's a perfect example of Michael making quite direct and simple the work he's been doing over many years. He's not wagging his finger at us. He's a serious sugar craver himself, and he's offering us his way out. Eat some fruit.
And by using himself as the skinny pig and then talking about it, did really have an impact on people who were listening. Listen to this clip from the food programme in 2018.
I'm Mark Hancock. I'm a financial advisor, but in 2010 I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Had it for around 6 years. I was listening to the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2, and they had Dr. Michael Mosley on there. And he said, well, perhaps we've been treating diabetes or diabetic patients incorrectly. We've been recommending the wrong types of foods, and actually, if you had a sort of a meal plan based around low-carb foods, but based around the Mediterranean diet, that they've seen a lot of evidence that people are starting to reduce their medication or come off the medication completely. And I said to my wife at the time, we've got to try this. And I was fully prepared to eat cardboard for 8 weeks, and it was nothing like that. The food was gorgeous, and the weight started falling off really dramatically, and my blood sugar had fallen into quite low levels really within a week. And I remember, because I'd already spoken to my nurse, and I'd been on metformin for 6 years, and she said, stop it, you don't need it anymore. And you can just imagine how that feels. It had only been a month or so before they were threatening to put my medication up, and now someone was telling me I didn't need it anymore.
Wow, and that's an amazing story.
So was what Michael Mosley was saying about reversing his own diabetes through changing his diet, that was being talked about, but he moved it into the mainstream?
I think he did. Him telling his own story encouraged people to go to their doctors and ask questions about what they might do to help themselves. But Michael's story added to the pressure on the medical system and medical schools to improve training, something that Michael spoke to me about in our program, Doctor's Orders, Getting Tomorrow's Medics Cooking.
Unfortunately, it's not part of the traditional training. So at medical school, I learned almost nothing about nutrition. And I have a son at medical school, and it's, again, not part of his key curriculum, if you like. So I don't get a sense that there are lots of doctors out there who feel empowered to tell patients much about nutrition. We would love to decrease the amount of drugs being prescribed. My wife is a GP. She would love to cut down, but at the moment, if something goes wrong, then you as GP get blamed, you get slammed, because it's not, if you like, conventional medicine.
Michael Mosley thought it important for medics to be trained in nutrition, but he saw the complexities in that too. If diet didn't, for whatever reason, work for patients, who's going to be responsible?
It's a good question, and especially in a medical system like we have at the minute that's gone a bit tick box. But that is where the research comes in. I mean, there is more and more research being done on the link between what you eat and illness, but there's not a lot of profit in it. I mean, medical research is driven in great part by the pharmaceutical industry. They can't make money out of you giving up ultra-processed foods, or, for example, adding mushrooms to your diet, or turmeric, or there's no money in that for the medical establishment. But before we talk about following the food science, Natalie, what would you say? I mean, you've listened to a lot of, you've probably listened to all Just One Thing by now. Is there one that really inspired you?
There's quite a few actually, Sheila. The one, I can't claim that I'm doing all of them kind of all the time, but I'm definitely paying attention to allowing more time between meals, so a sort of intermittent fasting, which was something he talked about a lot. And after Michael's series on cold therapy, I've been turning my shower to cold just before I get out, which is, I don't know, I never thought I'd find myself doing that, but I'm hoping that it's going to boost my mood. And
has it boosted your mood?
I think that remains to be seen. I don't know, it does something perhaps, I'm not sure. And I've also stopped feeling guilty about loving salad dressing so much, and I've been giving myself lots of extra virgin olive oil on my salads. What about you, Sheila?
Well, I'm with you on the olive oil.
Yeah.
I mean, I love olive oil. In general, I love the radicalness of Michael's vision, that health is what we need to focus on, and what patients can do for themselves. But as you said, and that works because it's always linked to good research, but of the ones I listened to recently, I just love what happens when you read poetry aloud, and has on your breathing, your immune system, your mood. So I've been reading,
Reading it out loud.
Well, you have to read it out loud.
Yeah.
Otherwise it doesn't read to. So, and I loved the Irish man we called to practice this, who hadn't read poetry since he was in school. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, which is what Michael used as his example. And also eating slowly. I'm one of those people, I'm always, it seems to me I'm always in a rush. Before I came here, I thought, I must eat something. Yeah. And I remember,
No, slow.
slow down. And the profound effects. The research on that's really good.
Yeah.
Really, really
Yeah, and we're going to come to that later. But on to the second way that Dr. Michael has been important in getting us all to understand the reasons to eat better. And that was through following the science. And I'm going to have to bring turmeric in here because it's one thing he really wants to know more about.
It's lunchtime and I'm throwing together a vegetarian curry. I'm about to add in something that could boost my mood and my memory, and it may even reduce inflammation. I'm adding turmeric.
Yeah, Michael was fascinated by turmeric. He obviously liked the flavour, and he heard all the claims about it. And those were some of the things I spoke to chef and food historian Manisha Bharadwaj about her food program.
All children knew about turmeric. It's the kind of spice that makes its presence known everywhere, obviously. But also it was used as a medicine in so many different ways. So for example, if you ever cut your finger, your grandmother or your mom would put turmeric on it straight off because it's antiseptic. So the powder, that is even today used as the first antiseptic on a wound. Every part of India uses it, and also used in ritual all over India.
And all over India, used in this sense of both as a food and as a medicine.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been around for, in thousands of years. People have known about the medicinal effects of turmeric.
Kettles boiling. Now, this is something that you start every day with?
Yes, I've been having turmeric tea for the past 10 years or so. Easy to do, and it's your boost of immunity first thing in the morning.
And Sheila, do you take turmeric?
I do, because I have a chronic cancer called multiple myeloma, and there is some evidence that curcumin, the active part of turmeric, has a particular effect on multiple myeloma. But listening to that clip again from the food program reminded me that I ought to be having that turmeric tea in the morning, not just relying on supplements.
So the moment you take it as supplements and cook with it, presumably, yeah. And for that program, when you were talking about turmeric, Michael came into the studio to talk to you about his research because he and his team had been doing some research on people for his TV program, Trust Me, I'm the Doctor.
What we were interested in is doing a study where we looked at changes in genetic markers, because realistically we're not going to be able to follow people for 20 years and see what difference it would make. So we just took a reasonably large group of volunteers, around 100 of them, and we randomly allocated them to either consuming a teaspoon of turmeric a day, they could have it anywhere they wanted, or they had the equivalent amount in a little capsule, or they took a placebo. We followed them for 6 weeks when they were doing that. And at the end of that time, I went off to find out the results. Professor Martin Vichventer has the results for the 3 groups.
We didn't find any changes in the placebo group between before and after 6 weeks. The supplement group didn't also show any difference, but the powder group definitely showed quite substantial differences between the pre and post turmeric exposure.
Interesting. So placebo no effect, supplement no effect, but turmeric powder definitely an effect.
Yes, that was really quite exciting, to be honest. And we found one particular gene showed the biggest difference, and what we know is that this gene is involved in 3 specific diseases. One is depression and anxiety, one is asthma and eczema, and the third one is cancer. And quite interesting, and this is really striking, is that those are the 3 entities that we know turmeric is affecting in a positive way.
That's very impressive, isn't it?
Now, what Prof couldn't say is he could say there were changes. He couldn't say whether they were good changes or bad changes. But they're going to look into it further. There were no changes in the other 2 groups. So that was kind of interesting.
You did a phone-in with Jeremy Vine in January, and what struck me about that was how many of the callers really felt very strongly positive about it. You know, using turmeric all the time, and one of them was feeding it to his dog, and which is another story.
Yes.
How much of that is wishful thinking?
I don't think it's necessarily wishful thinking. There may be a strong element of the placebo effect, and I'm a huge fan of the placebo effect. I think it's a great shame that we can't dispense placebo pills because they tend to be extremely effective, particularly in areas like pain. And that, I guess, is the point of doing big randomized controlled trials. The other thing I'd say is that it's very clear that we are all different, which is another obvious, but in some ways something that seems to slightly pass the scientific community by. So it could well be that even if you did a big randomized controlled trial, you would discover that on the whole the effect was negative, but there might be subgroups who did get huge benefit from it. And I guess that is the challenge.
That's a real challenge, because you could say the same for quite a few of the just one things. Not all will work for all people. But Michael's interest in the healing properties of turmeric carried on.
As you can hear from this next interview, when Michael spoke to Dr. Benny Anthony from the Menzies Institute for Medical Research at the University of Tasmania.
Now, I know you have done clinical trials looking at the benefits of using turmeric in arthritis. Can you tell me about that?
So this clinical trial involved 70 patients. So we selected patients based on pain as well as based on the joint inflammation. So we randomized 35 people into a placebo group and 35 people into the active group who received the turmeric extract. And then we followed these patients over 12 weeks, and we found that participants who were taking the turmeric extracts had relief in pain compared to the placebo group. Obviously, both placebo and treatment group both reduced the knee pain, but the treatment group had further reduction compared to the placebo group.
Right, because we know the placebo effect is very powerful, particularly in pain. So oddly enough, you would actually have to be quite impressive to outdo the placebo in this context. Did you also see an anti-inflammatory effect? Did they actually have less inflammation in the joint?
We did not find a significant difference in local inflammation. And we also tested whether the turmeric consumption led to a reduction in the inflammatory markers in the bloodstream. And we did not find a significant effect of these biomarkers because of the treatment of turmeric.
Dr. Benny Anthony from the Menzies Institute for Medical Research at the University of Tasmania. Now, before we move on, I have a question from you, Sheila. What just one thing do you find most challenging? It could be anything, food or lifestyle?
I've tried to do intermittent fasting, and I find that quite...
Yeah. I find the 5-2 very difficult.
I get too hungry. I feel terrible. I get difficult because so many people work.
Yeah. Some people can really manage it.
Yeah.
What about you? Well, we did mention it earlier, but it's got to be this one.
Eat slowly is something my mother used to say to me all the time, but it seems that science has finally caught up with that.
That's a real challenge, and I think we all know, we feel that wolfing down food is not doing us any good, and yet we're surrounded by these messages, grab and go, as though food is something we need to get over as fast as we can.
Yes, and back to my list of things, I think this is the third way that Michael helps us understand how to live better with food. His interest in food science goes beyond the effect ingredients have on our insides. He's also interested in the how and the when of eating too, the process, as it were. And for this just one thing, he was joined by Dr. Sarah Berry from the Department of Nutritional Sciences at King's College London and Chief Scientist at CERI.
We know from observational studies that people that eat their food more quickly have higher levels of obesity, have higher levels of cardiometabolic disorders. So, for example, higher cholesterol, worse insulin sensitivity, etc. We know from our own published research in nearly 1,000 individuals that 32% of people say they eat more quickly. And what we found is that in individuals who reported themselves to be fast eaters, they tended to be overweight compared to people who were eating at a slower or an average pace. We also found that faster eaters had a higher energy intake.
Why do you think people are eating more if they eat fast?
There's lots of receptors in your lower gut that release particular chemicals that go to your brain, and if you're eating really, really fast, you don't have time for the food to reach the receptors, for the receptors to release the chemicals, and for your brain to say, whoa, I've had enough, stop eating. We also know that the more fast you eat, that you have bigger increases, for example, in circulating blood glucose. So you have a higher peak in blood glucose. So what happens is when you eat more slowly, you release more saliva, and what that does is stimulate a better insulin release. And insulin simply reduces circulating blood glucose, it removes it from your bloodstream. And we know that this can also impact factors related to hunger, for example, factors related to fullness as well.
Sheila, I really struggle with this one. I find I always finish before everybody else, even when I'm really thinking about trying to slow down. And I think it goes back to childhood, doesn't it? Lots of us learned to eat fast back then. And I'm also trying not to encourage my daughter to eat too quickly, because she is quite a slow eater naturally. But I can't help myself say from time to time, just hurry up with that, finish it off now. And she complains to me about it too. She said the other day at lunchtime at school, they don't get enough time to sit and enjoy their lunch. It's kind of a hurried process, which she doesn't really like.
It's interesting because, I'd say that's a big issue all over Britain. Having gone into lots of schools, there's never enough time. I mean, Frida's right.
Yes.
There's not enough time for everyone to enjoy their lunch. It's completely different when we were recording in primary school last year. And even at the end of the day, families are so busy or so attached to screens, and they have such different tastes, that eating a meal together has turned into several people grabbing food on the go. A few years ago, we made a series of programs on how we eat, and one episode that has stayed with me was about the importance and challenges of eating as a family. And I went to have dinner with the Parker family, Maria and Dave, who at the time had 2 young children, and they were also fostering other children. They told me about why they make time to eat together.
It's one of the only times in the day where you're all going to be in the same room, really, especially with the range of the ages of children that we look after. Finding stuff that you're all going to be able to do together as a family is not that easy. So it's lovely that everyone comes together and can talk about their days. And
you get kids who maybe have not sat at the table before. I mean, how do you set boundaries? Tell them what the rules are, or you just show them by example?
Yeah, it's mostly just showing by example. Like I say, there are children that haven't had any sort of structural routine or house rules, but because I'd say my son is autistic, so he does like to have things in structure, so it's just how our house has always worked anyway, regardless of fostering. And it doesn't really take long for children when there's food involved. A lot of the children we look after, it's all about food anyway, because they either haven't had very much before, or when they've had it they've gorged because of worrying about when their next going to have it. So again, it's quite easy to get them into a routine and to get them at the table and sitting nicely, because they're going to be eating, so they know what's coming.
Steve Biddulph is a psychologist who's written several global bestsellers, including The Secret of Happy Children, Raising Boys, and now Raising Girls.
It's a remarkable thing that it's now a countercultural activity to sit down together at a table. People are rushing like never before, and what we're finding is family life is really different to what it used to be like. Now, in some ways it's better. It's more relaxed. We don't define families in such narrow ways, and mums and dads are more equal, and there's a lot of improvements. But what we lost, I think, was the feeling of that a family is about closeness, and it's not a factory for making kids. It's a place to hang out where mental health is nurtured. And so one of the best ways to do that nurturing is to say, okay, when do we get together that's going to be the most comfortable? And the family meal turns out to be the one that seems to work best. And there's been an extraordinary amount of research into this. A Canadian study found that frequent family dinners led to fewer emotional and behavioral problems, greater emotional well-being, more trusting and helpful behaviors towards others, and higher life satisfaction.
That was Steve Biddulph talking to you in 2017, Sheila.
And before him, the marvelous Parker family.
And this kind of ties into a more recent interview that the food writer B. Wilson did with Jager Wise for a programme we did about mindful eating.
B is one of the founders of Taste Ed, which is a sort of a movement now in nurseries and primary schools about getting children to experience eating, to take away this fear of the new. They're trying to revolutionize food education in the UK. Using the Sapere method, and children learn new things about food using all their senses.
Teaching a child to pay attention to their own senses when they're eating more can have a really profound impact in actually transforming their tastes.
And I felt this really tied in as well. It's about getting children to eat food and become better at eating food perhaps, but it's also about the way they eat food and the way they enjoy food.
Yeah,
which is what Michael Mosley's talking about with the Slow It Down.
Yeah, I think I've never heard Michael Mosley talk about Taste Ed, but I think he would have liked it.
So one of the activities we do sometimes is we get children to put on ear defenders when they're eating or trying something. And what that does is it shuts out all of the outside noises, but the sounds inside your head become hugely amplified. So the sound of yourself chewing is really dramatic. And there was a school that we went to in Brixton with Taste Ed, and there was a child who was on the autistic spectrum, and their teaching assistant said, don't worry, they won't try anything new, they definitely won't try tomatoes, which was what we were trying that day, but don't worry, don't take it personal. And then we just turned around and they put on the ear defenders, and this child was just popping cherry tomato after cherry tomato into their mouth with a huge smile. And it was the most magical thing to see, that somehow there was something about shutting out all of the outside world and just focusing on the food that for that child meant that they could enjoy it for the first time in their lives. And that's really transformative and beautiful.
B. Wilson from a 2022 edition of the food programme on mindful eating. And all those programmes, Natalie, are still available to listen on BBC Sounds, aren't they?
Yeah, and I'll post the links to them in today's programme description so you can get to them easily.
So what's next on our list?
Taking responsibility for our own health, regardless of what the medical system or anyone else is telling us.
And that's the fourth way.
That is.
I mean, that's the whole concept. Surely just behind just one thing.
Yeah, it does seem kind of obvious, but for lots of us, it really isn't.
It's funny because I took a plane to Greece to a wedding just not long after Michael Mosley died. And somehow, people sitting next to me, we all got talking about just one thing.
Yeah.
And both of these women said they both brushed their teeth standing on one leg every night and every morning.
Brilliant.
So we all went back to the loo at the back of the plane and we agreed that while we were washing our hands in memory of Michael Mosley, we did it standing on one leg.
Excellent.
So what archive have we got?
Well, I was wondering if you remembered this conversation, Sheila.
The problem with the thinking of nutritionists last century was that it was all to do with protein and body weight, and they didn't think about brain health. Brain disorders have now overtaken all other goals of health.
That's Professor Michael Crawford, Director of the Institute of Brain Chemistry and Human Nutrition at Imperial College.
That's right, let's have a listen to a little bit more of what he's saying to you.
So we're in a very powerless situation, and the first thing to do is to get the balance more appropriate, that is by reducing the amount of omega-6 fatty acids that we're eating in seed oils, in prepared foods that are built with seed oils, and the sort of margarine type foods. Not necessarily eliminating them, but at least controlling the quantity, and then putting greater emphasis on the absolute wonderful wealth of food that comes from the seed.
And in the 70s, Sheila, Professor Michael Crawford made the predictions.
He predicted that our current problems with heart disease and stroke would be followed by a plague of mental health problems because the lack of omega-3 in our diets are affecting our brain function. And he said that the government's advice on fish to eat at least 2 portions a week, and one of those to be oily fish, was far too low for people to get the right amount of omega-3 fatty acids. He said we should be eating more oily fish and much more seafood in general. and far, far less of processed foods made with vegetable oils.
And that advice is still hasn't changed since you made that program, right? And that brings us to the next thing, as I said, Michael Mosley's commitment to sharing what he knows about food and encouraging people to take personal responsibility, even when it seems to contradict official advice.
Now, despite the fact that we are an island nation surrounded by seas, only a quarter of UK adults report eating any oily fish, with less than 16% of young adults eating at least 2 portions of fish a week. And it's important to note that when it comes to topping up your omega-3 levels, the kind of fish matters. Whitefish, like cod, which you find in fish and chips, are a great source of protein and other nutrients, but low in omega-3. The simplest way to remember what's meant by oily fish is to use the acronym SMASH. Salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Smash fish are all great sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Another thing you should bear in mind is that although there are lots of different types of omega-3 fatty acids, 2 are particularly important: EPA and DHA. These have been extensively studied and shown to help reduce inflammation, which is associated with a whole host of negative health outcomes, like heart disease and dementia.
Last year at the Hay Festival, when you interviewed Tim Spector, a well-known professor of genetic epidemiology at King's College London, Michael was airing his take responsibility message again. Tim Spector had just told him that if he had to do just one thing, it would be to aim at eating 30 different plants a week.
Now, you identify 30 as your just one thing. Mine is slightly different because mine would be a Mediterranean diet, which I suspect you wouldn't broadly agree with, and that is lots of nuts, oily fish, veg and olive oil. Fish, think smash, that is salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines and herring.
Yeah, well, I do eat fish, but just for environmental reasons. I don't eat that many fish. The smaller the fish, the more sustainable it is, and mussels and clams are perfectly sustainable.
Right, so Tim's top tip is to eat at least 30 different plants a week. For me, it's the Mediterranean diet, but one thing is clear: if you want to benefit your heart health, your gut microbiome, and your brain, then put aside the ultra-processed food and pick up a plant. Thank you very much, Tim. It's been great.
And I think what this clip shows is that at the heart of all of his just one things was food, wasn't it? That was the one thing he always came back to.
Absolutely. He really did understand that food was at the heart of things. So, you said there would be 5.
I did. And the 5th is on the line to us now. One of our colleagues here at the food programme. It's Dan Saladino.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Sheila. Hi, Natalie. How are you both?
We're fine. We've both been enjoying listening back to some of the food program archive and from Michael Mosley's series of Just One Thing.
Dan,
yeah.
Can you tell us what difference Michael Mosley made to you while you were trying out the keto diet? Because he featured, didn't he, in a program you made called Fixing Dan in January of last year?
Yeah, it's an interesting story of Michael Mosley behind the scenes as well, because on the food program I've tried to make editions in which I appear as a guinea pig. And there was one edition where it's of January and I'm trying to get in shape, and I embark, this is in January 2022, on an attempt to try and do keto for a month. Now, Michael wasn't in that edition, but he was listening, and then he sent me a message and saying that nothing to do with the food program or radio, but if you need any help, advice, support, I'm here, so just get in touch, which was lovely and really kind. He sent some articles, research papers, he even sent copies of his books, and then a year later, life moves on and nothing much happened with my attempt to do keto. So I made an edition of the food program called Fixing Dan, where I was trying to think, well, let's get beyond keto and see what else I can do. And I included Michael in that program, and he actually became the spine of the program because of his voice, his experience, his insights. What was fascinating is that he was so honest about his own life and his own challenges with food and getting fit.
Well, let's have a listen to a little bit of that programme now.
I was doing okay in November, and then come Christmas time, surrounded by lots of sugary treats, and almost impossible to say no to them. So I ate too much junk and drank too much. And when I stood on the scales, my weight had gone up by a couple of kilos, and worse was when I measured my blood sugars and my blood pressure, both of them had gone up. So I need to shed those kilos sooner rather than later.
Do you think it's bizarre that the nation wakes up on January the 1st and millions of us start to put an exercise and diet regime in place, rather than thinking that it's June the 3rd and I should be doing this? Why do we do it?
I think it's because most of us have overindulged, and that is almost a historic thing. So I think it is a period where you reflect on what's happened to you, but also the junk is largely being eaten. The evidence does suggest that the best time to lose weight is soon after you put it on. So January is pretty well as good as any other time. The question is, do you want to do it? Are you motivated to change? How motivated are you to change? So for you, I guess the question would be, what are my weaknesses? For me, it is essentially sugary junk food. Then if it's in the house, I will eat it. Crisps, chocolate, cakes, biscuits, if they're there. When I get stressed, when I have slept badly, when I need a lift, if those things are there, despite everything I know, I will eat. If I know there are 5 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, or sometime when I've had a disappointment, I will go looking for it, I will eat it, I will hide the evidence I've eaten it. So, despite everything I know, I spent a decade learning this stuff. I know that I shiver on the brink of pancreatitis. Still, I'm moving.
And I think that summarises my fifth reason why he mattered. Because he knew that by sharing being honest and supportive of each other could lead to some of the biggest changes.
I think his personality comes through there, but in that programme, there were so many wow moments that were brought. For example, the role of protein, how lack of protein can be a driver of hunger, of appetite. He, in that edition, talked about the role of inulin.
Can get it in juice artichokes, onions, garlic leeks, absolutely. So inulin, in this particular study, not only did the microbiome switch to a more favorable form, but they found that people's sugar cravings went down. Not only self-reported, but also in brain stem.
So Michael, my gut microbiome is exerting powerful input on the food decision without me even realising.
Absolutely, and there's even a term for it, psychobiotics, which is the link between what's going on in your gut and what's going on in your brain. We know there's a clear link with things like depression, so that if you change your diet, you go from a traditional Western diet to a more Mediterranean style one with fibre and all those other polyphenols and delicious things. It is possible to reduce symptoms of depression, even in people who are quite severely.
Forget Instagram or TikTok, the real influencers shaping our diets are the people we live with.
You've got to get your family on board. Without a doubt, the single best thing you can do to say to your family, this is so important to me. With my kids as well. You know, I have 4 kids now in their 20s and early 30s now, and they do like some junk food, but they know they can't leave it around. One of the lowest moments of my life is when I ate my daughter's Easter egg when she was about 8. She's 22 and she could never forget me.
So much of that, but get to the really solid research and convey that to an audience in a really, and for me, as you just heard, in a really clear way. And that point about getting your family on board, I mean, it's just kind of a classic, just one thing type approach. What a brilliant science journalist, storyteller, broadcaster, a voice you could trust.
And he makes you think, I can do that. I mean, he fills me with hope and, you know, the sense that this would actually enrich my life, so why not do it?
And I think that's why Just One Thing is such a perfect platform for him. 13 and a half minutes on air, and it will change your life. And these episodes, we're waiting there free on BBC Sounds, and he's left behind this incredible archive that can impact on health and happiness. And Michael's legacy in terms of a life lived is much, much bigger than that. But how many program makers will ever get to say that they made such a difference to so many people through program making? A very, very few, and he's one of them.
And if you had to choose, what's your just one thing?
The addition that I would say is one of those radio moments where you stop everything and listen is eating all the fish.
Which we just heard actually before you joined us.
Well, this was an addition that touches on omega-3 fatty acids, goes into the mechanism, how does it work, so it talks about EPA, DHA fatty acids, goes into research from decades ago about Inuit populations, how such a high-fat, low-vegetable diet can be so healthy, relatively healthy to that particular population. Such a brilliant program.
It was a completely brilliant program, and important in that, the food program, they've been following that story for 20 odd years, and there was, Michael moving that science out and making it understandable. It was a brilliant program. Well, thank you, Dan, thank you, Natalie, and thank you, of course, Dr. Michael Mosley, for helping us all understand more about how food and the way we eat is the road to living a better life. There are, of course, many more Just One things on food and other subjects available that we could talk about today. But why don't you let us know your favourites on our social media pages? We are BBC Food Prog on Instagram and X. I look forward to hearing from you.
The food programme was presented by Sheila Dillon and was produced in Bristol for BBC Audio by Natalie Donovan. And food is also on the brain for another of our Radio 4 announcers, who can often be heard here in the continuity corridors, extolling the virtues of one particular root vegetable.
Hello, I'm Arlene Fleming, one of the announcers at BBC Radio 4. The joys of beetroot. Having grown up in the west of Scotland, beetroot would often find its way onto my plate. My father, at the grand old age of 88, swears by it. I was more ambivalent about it, until I heard Just One Thing with Dr. Michael Mosley. He told me about its anti-inflammatory benefits, how great it is for the brain, heart and muscles, and how it can help shift workers like me with energy. And, gentlemen, it has aphrodisiac qualities, but you should really listen to that on BBC Sounds.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. And while you're there, if you'd like to remind yourself of some of the other health and wellbeing tips that Michael shared, just search for Just One Thing. Now on Radio 4, here's Naomi Alderman with the final part of her series, The Third Information Crisis.
In the novel Orlando by Virginia Woolf, a gender-changing protagonist lives without aging for centuries, and so experiences the way that the pace of life has sped up. Late in the novel, Woolf describes driving in a car through modern London like this. Here was a market, here a funeral, here a procession with banners upon which was written Ra, Un. Nothing could be seen whole or read from start to finish. After 20 minutes, the body and mind were like scraps of torn paper tumbling from a sack. And indeed, the process of motoring fast out of London resembles the chopping up small of identity. This is how new technologies work. Things get faster and faster. That's basically the purpose of technology. It lets us do things we could do before, but easier and faster. Or it lets us do new things, which means that the pace of change feels faster. Eventually, we get used to the speed. We find ways to manage it. The speed of a car doesn't startle us anymore. It's when the technology is new, before we've learned to manage it, that we most experience that fragmentation. My suggestion is, that's also when social norms tend to be most open to change too. It's frightening, and it's also exciting. Orlando was published in 1928, the same year that women in England, Wales and Scotland got a right to vote that was equal with men. Orlando's change from him to her as Orlando sped through the centuries was a true representation of rapid social change after the First World War. Men and women were more alike than they've ever been. The torn scraps of paper rearranged themselves into a new social order. The philosopher Peter Singer has written about an expanding circle of us over the past centuries. As humans, we have grown able to see people who are increasingly different from us, but still like us, still deserving the rights, freedoms and privileges of humans. No change is universal, of course, but broadly, over the millennia, the idea of a fundamental human equality has spread. At one time, only kings had what you might call a vote. They decided what happened. Slowly, the idea spread that maybe all the nobles could participate in making decisions. Then maybe it was all men who owned property, but probably they were white, able-bodied Christian men. We've thought wider and wider. Maybe, we've thought, all humans are people, no matter our skin colour, ethnic roots or religion. Maybe people with disabilities are still people. Maybe LGBT plus people are people. Maybe women are people. This is a simple version of a complex story. Like I say, it hasn't happened everywhere or evenly. We don't have a complete record. There's evidence that some ancient and indigenous cultures may have been very egalitarian. The same things don't happen in the same order or lined up in the same way. Ancient Athens absolutely thought that men who have sex with men are people, but they owned slaves and didn't think that women were really people at all. There are always some who call for movement backward. Still, on the broadest level, this is what has happened. And I think what I've been talking about, the revolutions around a series of information crises, is how it's happened. Reading and writing, spreading words and ideas faster and faster, it becomes increasingly obvious that there's not a kind of person who isn't really a person. I can't call that anything but wonderful. I do think we're heading somewhere